We're so glad you're tuning in again to our program, The Catholic View for Women, where we give you news and views from a truly Catholic perspective. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with my co-hosts Elena Rodriguez and Janet Morana, and we're continuing our discussion in this episode, and this is, I think, probably episode number 3 on family situations. And now we're going to talk about today, forgiving mother. This is in relationship to those who may have been hurt by their moms, which is a big problem. And we know a lot of people suffer with broken relationships with their parents or with siblings, as we discussed on the last previous shows. But this mother issue is it's a pretty big deal, right, Janet?
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, my own case with my mom, we had a very bad relationship, I would say, through the years, starting from when I, obviously, as far as I can remember back. I always felt like the black sheep of the family, like the daughter that couldn't quite measure up ever. My mother never said anything nice to me. She always criticized me. And that can really get to you from the time you're a child, you know, like she didn't like my hair. I wore glasses too from the time I was 18 months old, and I had all these, like, you know, braces and stuff as I got a little bit older. So you become very self-conscious. If anything, your mom should be the person who's kind of building you up instead of putting you down. But, you know, she always did things like that. And, you know, as we got older, it got worse. And of course, you know, she would hit us, you know, as kids. We were hit lots, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, I was the oldest, and there were 4 of us, but there was a big gap between the kids because of multiple miscarriages. And so when I was, you know, 11, she had another child. When I was 13, another. And I became like the caregiver of my younger brother and sister. And to the point that she would be really mean about it. I had learned to cook when I was like 10 years old and had to help prepare meals. I mean, that's stuff that a 10-year-old should not be doing, basically, you know. And as I got to be an adult, it used to really bother me that my mom, you know, she never said she loved me, and she never, you know, that's very hurtful if you can't hug me or things like that, you know. And so it took me a very, very long time to begin to analyze, why was my mom like this? You know, and I realized that, you know,
her insecurities,
she had her own insecurities. She had her own psychological problems. I mean, my mom lost both her parents when she was 3 years old, within 3 months of each other. She was adopted by her biological aunt and uncle, who raised her, and she was raised in a beautiful home and all that. But I noticed my mom obsessed over that her whole life. We always heard about this whole story, how I lost my parents when I was a little girl. And so it's kind of like she wasn't healed from that loss, and she just carried it over.
Transferred it over.
She transferred it over, having a difficulty bonding with her own children. And it took me many, many years, and finally I did go for counseling for it. And I realized that it wasn't anything I did wrong. You know, because I was blaming myself and trying to measure up constantly, you know.
No matter what you did, she never,
right.
Never, yeah.
And I realized, you know, in time that it was these other hurts in her own childhood from very young that weren't addressed, that she carried over and dealt, and couldn't bond with her own children properly and things like that. And so I was at peace eventually with it once I realized, but it was a long journey. It was a long, hard journey, and there was a lot of traumatic things that happened, you know, throughout my life. But I learned, you know, to forgive her, and I learned to accept that there was never going to be this perfect relationship. And I think that's part of the problem is when we think of, we're supposed to have this perfect relationship with our moms, and if it's not perfect, we're constantly searching and desiring it. It's naturally, you want to be nurtured. Yes. You know, it's a nurturing thing. And when it's not there, it's like you start doing the blame game. What did I do? You know, I used to think it was like, oh, you know, I'm not pretty. I wear glasses. I have, you know, it's like you think I'm chubby, or, you know, you're trying to, you know, figure things out. But it took me a long time and counseling till I got at peace with it and be able to accept my mom and understand that it wasn't anything that I did.
And to forgive her also.
And to forgive her. Yeah, forgiving is the big step. And it's kind of like when I finally forgave her, totally really forgave her, it was like this whole burden came up off of me. And it didn't matter what, I no longer was looking for that approval, and it didn't matter any longer that I realized I forgave her and it was okay, you know. And so by the time she passed away, I was at peace with it all.
And if you think about it too, you're in your 60s, I'm in my late 50s. When both of us were growing up, they didn't really have a lot of the counseling that they have now. So the
Exactly.
parents back then didn't deal with their own
No,
issues.
no.
And, yeah, and I think a lot of the parents from the baby boom generation, or the greatest generation actually, would be our parents and my mother and your
Right.
mother from that age group, because my mother is still alive at 92. But they were just told to tough it out. Just
Tough it
go
out,
through
right.
it, tough it out. You
Swallow
offer it
them.
up, swallow it. You don't talk
Right.
about things, you bury them. And you could see a lot of that and the fallout of it in family relationships, as we were talking about in our previous episode, that not dealing with it is not good.
It's not good, and you see, the bond between a mother and a child is like no other bond, because of the mother carrying the child in the womb for 9 months.
Right.
So it's not comparable. There's other wounds. There could be a sister wound, a brother wound, a father wound, that like no other, the mother wound. Then as you grow up, both for a little boy or a little girl, this little boy or this child grows up thinking, I'm not good enough, there's nothing I can do that can ever be enough. And there's still that need within us to look for that nurturing mother love. But if we don't find it in our mother, we might
Try to
go
find
to
it
the
somewhere
wrong
else.
places.
Right. It's very true. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I had to do in the counseling was they ask you to go back as far as you can remember and write down all the hurts. So, and write it like you're writing it to your mom. You hurt me when you pulled my hair. You hurt me when, you know, and just begin listing all the hurts and go through your life. And that's very healing just in itself, because you're looking at it. And then one of the steps is you can then share that, you know, with the parent if you choose to, but tell them, I forgive you for these things, and I'd like to know maybe how I haven't measured up, or how so it's like a process you try to go through. Part of it, my mother didn't want to cooperate, but what was healing for me is, even though I had, like, because people say, well, what if my mother won't cooperate? Yeah, mine didn't either. But going through the steps and the process is what helped me heal and get to the point where I could forgive.
Right.
And I think that's what's so important. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, in this day and age, we see so much more of this problem because of abortion.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Because of abortion. And you know
And
this,
isn't it
Teresa.
true that a lot of women, after they have an abortion, if they go on to have other children, and many of them can't because their bodies were ravaged by the
Right.
abortion, but when they do, because of that guilt, and because you mentioned a really good point, Elena, about that bond.
The bond.
There's a huge physical bond. It's not just the emotional bond. You mentioned the womb, the chemical, and also that a mother, every time whether she has a miscarriage or an abortion, she's carrying the cells of those children.
That's right.
So it's a real huge thing to think about, and just gives you the chills when you think about the way God designed it. But you know in your work that a lot of these moms can't bond with their children when they eventually have them.
Unless they've gone through healing. If they have not been healed from that prior abortion, that carries over into how they will bond with their future children, which will be a difficulty in bonding. And I mean, another huge factor is child abuse. You know, when you think about it, in our country, they said, well, you know, if we have abortion, there'll be no child abuse. that will be settled.
Right.
That will be a settled
That
problem.
was a big actually push from the left to try to get
Yes.
abortion, you know,
Right,
through.
because and child abuse statistics have gone up. And if you'd like, I have this report I discovered, and you can get this at the website childhelp.org. Is this report? Every year, more than 3.6 million referrals are made to child protection services just here in the United States, involving more than 6.6 million children. All right, because of problems. And the United States, of course, has the worst record among industrial nations on child abuse and problems like that.
Well, look at this too, Janet. It says involving more than 6.6 million children, and one referral can involve multiple children.
Exactly.
So it's larger actually
larger
than the
than that.
6.6 million.
Right. And then, of course, it talks about the percentage of the abuse. So of those statistics, 28.3% are from physical abuse, 20.7% are from sexual abuse, emotional abuse is 14.8%. I mean, it's staggering, these numbers. And of course, physical neglect is another issue, which is 9.9%, and emotional abuse is 10.6%.
They've done studies to show that, talk about physical neglect. I mean, I grew up in a very affectionate Italian family, Italian-American family, so I'm very affectionate. That's the way I am with people. I hug them, and that's just the way, and I'm sure you too in the
Yes,
Hispanic
very
community,
much.
very
Very
physical.
much
And we
so.
see each other, women
Kissy,
and men,
kissy.
Yes,
and kiss
yes,
on
yes,
both
very
sides of the
much.
cheek. That's just
Yes.
standard, right?
Right.
That's what you
Yes,
do.
right.
And yet the people who don't get that physical attention, especially babies, there have been studies to show that it inhibits their growth, their mental and physical capacity.
The babies, it was at World War II, around the
Yeah.
time of World War II, that all these babies in
Ended
Europe
up in the orphanages.
Yes, the parents had been killed, and the nurse, there wasn't enough nurses to go around and hug them and hold them. They were being fed, they were being cared for, they were
Right,
warm.
they're getting all the basic
everything,
needs.
all the physical
Right.
needs, but the emotional need was, and they started dying. Nobody knew why,
I know.
and it
Yeah,
was
isn't
because
that
of
amazing?
the
Yeah, we were meant
emotional
for
neglect.
relationship. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's such a heartbreaking thing, and you think about the Holy Family, you think about Our Lady and St. Joseph and Jesus, and we're going to talk about that when we come back in relationship to our guest, Marge Fenelon. But this bond, and a lot of it has to do with, and I hope people understand this, a lot of it has to do with our parents and maybe some of their own issues. So we need to kind of, it's just like when I see the women at Silent No More at the March for Life at the Supreme Court, and the women screaming at the ones taking part, giving their testimony. You know that's coming from a place of pain, and they're
That's the
inflicting it on the
consequence.
people who are reminding them of what they
happened.
did, because they haven't come to terms with it, just like maybe with your mother,
Right.
in terms of she's a mom, but she didn't have a mom, and she's frustrated because she didn't, whatever was going through her mind at the time.
There was an underlying cause to explain that.
Yeah.
That behavior was
Yeah.
actually
And
a
like you said,
consequence.
Teresa, back in that generation, it was like you just dealt with it. It was like, shut up and move
yes.
forward.
But
yes,
you're
now-
not dealing with it because
Right.
it comes out. I remember
Right.
my mom, and she's 92. You know my mom,
I know
almost
Rosie.
93 now, and she had no self-confidence, and to this day it's the same thing, because she had aunts who would tell her, well, you didn't go to college. My mom was a very smart cookie, a lot of common sense, very street smart, very intelligent, but she always sees herself, and she still says today, oh, I'm so stupid. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because growing up, there were her aunts who had their kids in college, and her parents couldn't afford, my mom came from a family of 10 kids, and yet the other family members, cousins, were all going to college on the East Coast. And my mom was told by her aunt that she was stupid because she wasn't going to college. And that stuck with my mother to this day, and she's 92. And then when she went to her mother, my grandmother, may she rest in peace, to say, well, Mom, why don't you defend us? Why don't you, say that you don't have to have a college education to be smart? And then I'm not stupid. I get really good grades in high school and whatever. And, oh, don't say anything. We don't want to cause any
friction.
problems.
No friction in the
Well, let's
family.
take a break. Great discussion, ladies. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, as we continue this show on Forgiving Mother, there's a beautiful book out that talks about healing, and we're going to be hearing from a friend of mine, a beautiful author and speaker, Marge Fenelon, who also had some tragedy in her own life in relationship with her mother. We'll be right back. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Catholic View for Women. Continuing our discussion with my co-hosts Elena Rodriguez and Janet Morana. I'm Teresa Tomeo. We're talking about forgiving mother. We've had some conversations on the show this season about the pains that come from a broken relationship. And more specifically, in this episode, we're talking about having a broken relationship with your own mom and how you can heal that with the help of our spiritual mother, our beautiful, blessed mother, who truly is our mother. Janet, the book that we're going to be discussing now and the video clip that we have is a beautiful book by Marge Fenelon, who has her own story of issue with her mom.
Yeah, well, recently I caught up with Marge at the Catholic Marketing Network in Pennsylvania. I attended that convention, and this was a book of Forgiving Mother, a Marian Novena of Healing and Peace. And I had an opportunity to sit down and chat with Marge and asked her, tell us honestly, tell us about your experience and this book. So let's see what Marge had to say.
Well, the Blessed Mother first, but primarily it was my siblings. So this backstory of that book is my siblings and I were raised by a mom who was very troubled, probably had mental illness that went undiagnosed. Growing up, we suffered a lot, as you can imagine. But of all of my siblings, had that's too long of a backstory to go for one film clip. But I had a very close relationship with our Blessed Mother from the time I was a baby. I was consecrated to her by a very holy priest, whose the process of canonization is open. Father Joseph Kentenek, he founded the apostolic movement in Schoenstatt. I believe that from that moment, Mary had me. So in growing up, all of the difficulties with my mom were hard, but they were less hard in the sense that I found in the Blessed Mother really my true mother. And so as we reached adulthood, and as my mother began to get older, and we, realized, my siblings realized that, we've got a story to tell, and she meaning me, you have to tell this story, because I found healing in the Blessed Mother, in the heart of the Blessed Mother. So the novena is actually just the last maybe third of the book. The first 3/4, 2/3 of the book is my story, but also it's like a workbook. It helps to work through anyone who's been seriously hurt or harmed. It could be an abusive relationship of any kind. It could be someone who just did something very, very awful to you. But the process is the same, and the book is about that process of learning to realize I'm a child of God, but so is the person who has harmed me, a child of God. And being able to accept that and learn how to love through that and because of that, and then move on to forgiveness and healing and peace. So the novena is basically praying your way through what you just learned in the first 2/3 of the book. For anyone who suffers from abuse of any kind, mistreatment of any kind, I highly recommend turning to the Blessed Mother. And I understand, particularly if they're suffering from what I've called the mother wound. We talk about the father wound. We don't talk often about the mother wound. What happens there is that it can be very difficult for that person to reach for any mother figure, but then also to really open themselves to the Blessed Mother. That's the first step. The first step is letting go of your preconceptions about mother or mother figures and realizing this is Christ's mother. She loves you and she would never hurt you. That's absolutely the key. This is why I had to write the book. That's the key to the healing. That is the key to reaching forgiveness, healing, and peace. To understand that the word mother doesn't always hurt. And you won't always be hurt by whoever it is who has harmed you, because she's there.
One of the reflections that I draw from Marge Fenelon's witness is that we should all keep a sticky note on our mirrors when we look at it first thing in the morning. We're getting ready for the day, and that sticky note should say, "Our most blessed mother is my mother." Right. We should keep that as a remembrance. The role of the mother is so important because it helps us understand the role of our most blessed mother. But when our own mothers do not represent that as well as they should, we still need to remember that our most blessed mother is our mother, and put it there as a physical reminder, a little sticky note there.
Or have images of Our Lady all over the place, as Janet and I do in our homes.
Exactly.
Yeah, or we have the kitchen Madonna.
We have the kitchen Madonna.
Right.
And another point of reflection is the fact that it's the fact of forgiveness. Until you don't forgive, you don't free up yourself from that burden. And forgiving doesn't mean that you are giving the other person a pass or excusing or saying it's okay.
Forgiveness is not the opposite of justice.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's still, you recognize it did happen. But with forgiving, you're doing two things. One, you're lifting a very heavy burden off yourself. And second, you're doing an act of charity to the person who also offended you. But the other very important thing you're doing is you're stopping that cycle to go on to the next generation. You're putting a stop, because you will also be affected by this, and you might not realize it, that you're passing along all this abuse to the next generation or the people around you.
I bet if you could have spoken to your mother about her situation, she probably never forgave her parents for dying on her.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well,
she probably had this, "Why did you leave me?"
Right.
Type of a syndrome.
Well, that's it. She spent her whole life feeling abandoned. Even when she wasn't abandoned, because she had beautiful parents who adopted her, but she just obsessed with that her whole life. And I think had she gone for counseling, or she could face that, things probably would have been different. But Marge's book, I think, is so beautiful because in the beginning, like she said, she goes through her whole story. But then the last part of the book, it's the actual exercises to do. And I'd like to just to give our viewers a little example here. There's one chapter back here that takes Mary, let me see my mother as a child of God. And you know, that's a great concept right there, because if you're having, let's say your mother is so abusive, like we just said, to you, there's probably a background reason what caused her to be this way. But you have to remember, she's still a child of God. And that will help you look at your mother maybe in a little bit different way. So what Marge does here in the book, she gives you a passage to read first to meditate, and then there's another section to reflect. But then what I like here, she actually has a discussion question. So she says, now, you know, after you've done the reflection and the meditating, here's to ask. Ask yourself the following questions. You may want to consider them while sitting in a prayerful place and speaking directly to our Lord. Or you may want to write your responses in a journal of healing and peace, which is a great idea, like to get a journal if you're going to work through these exercises. The first thing you're supposed to ask yourself, what keeps my mother crippled and bent over? So in my mother's case, it was abandonment. And it took me a long time to get to that, all right? And then what are the crosses she bears? And how has her past contributed to her abusiveness? And then what good qualities does my mother have? And that's a positive thing, because, you know, when I think back, okay, if I want to look for good stuff, well, my mother made the best Christmas cookies. I mean, and she baked for a whole month prior to Christmas. She used to store them. We had this back porch, and she used to lock the door so we couldn't get in and sneak out the cookies. I must have got that from her, because
you make the best
I make good cookies.
Right.
So sometimes if you can just stop long enough to address the hurt, but try to remember the good. And if I think back too, you know, we had nice Christmases, and you know, we didn't have a fortune, but my mom always made sure that there were nice presents under the tree from Santa Claus, and the same with the Easter Bunny. And you know, so sometimes I think we can focus so much on the negative, we forget the good. And I found, you know, although I went through counseling, I think you never stop healing, you never stop learning. And I found Marge's book gave me more insights. Like I remembered the cookies, and I remembered other good, positive things. And then, of course, at each thing at the end, there's a prayer. And this one says, Dear Mother Mary, my mother is like the arthritic woman in the gospel who could never stand up straight. Like her, my mother has suffered many years. Her suffering, her woundedness, has caused me to suffer as well. You know what has caused the crippling of my mother's, even if I do not. You know the burden she bears, even though I cannot see it. You also know what it will take for her to be cured. Please, Mother, intercede for her before your Son and ask him to heal her so that she can be the child of God that she was meant to be.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. And so I just found, like I said, even though I went through counseling, I found this another step of healing for myself.
Right.
You know, even though my mother's passed on, the memories now are becoming more positive, because it helps you reflect back on looking back to the good. And kind of letting the negative stay in the past, and forgetting it. You know?
Yeah, and some
Healing
people
of
can
memories.
literally, I mean, you've become very successful, and you've raised 3 beautiful daughters, and now you have grandchildren, and even though you've had some pain in your life with your marriage, as you've told our viewers, but you can overcome this. You don't have to constantly hang on to this and say, well, at some point as adults, we do have to take charge. I mean, even the famous televangelist Joyce Meyer, who was sexually abused practically forever by her father, she said at some point you have to take control of that, and you have to get help, and you have to move on. And this book will help you do that.
Exactly.
Already time for homework. I can't believe it. Great discussion,
I know.
ladies.
Just remember, it doesn't own you anymore.
Amen.
All right. So number 1, of course, is read this marvelous book, Forgiving Mother, a Marian Healing Novena of Healing and Prayer by Marge Fenelon, and it's available at the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Another recommendation we have is find a spiritual director by talking to your priest or calling your diocese. It could be your priest as your spiritual director, or maybe he'll refer you to someone. And then,
this is really important. I know we have to rush through this, but this is really, really important. In addition to speaking out family members, even counseling, to talk to a spiritual director. And it doesn't have to be a priest. There are people who are trained as spiritual directors at the diocese.
And that's why I said to call the diocese. And of course, Elena's marvelous suggestion, put a sticky note on your mirror with the prayer, Jesus, please forgive me, your mother. And then number 4, of course, go to the CatholicViewForWomen.com. That's our website where we have all the information from these programs. All the resources are there with the links. For example, like the statistics we read earlier in the program, it's all be on the website, plus our programs you can view in case you missed them a few years back. They're there. And finally, like the Catholic View for Women on Facebook.
We're out of time. Great discussion, Forgiving Mother. Great book by Marge Fenelon. I've endorsed it. She's been on my show about this. And remember, you're not alone when it comes to family issues, and we are willing to talk to you. If you have a question, email us through our website, as Janet said, at the Catholic View for Women. Thanks for watching. On behalf of my co-hosts, Elena Rodriguez and Janet Morana, we really appreciate your viewership, and we'll see you next time on the Catholic View for Women.